fascinated me with your Twitter page, and you first of all, you are a doctor, right?
Well, I'm a PhD. I can't save anybody's life.
Okay.
I could perform, Victorian surgery amputation or something.
I think anybody can, right?
Yeah.
Is that
probably.
a real one?
No, this is a prop.
Oh.
So this was a real fun thing to get through customs when I was coming in from Britain. It's a Victorian amputation saw. It's called the Clockwork Saw, and for people who are just listening, it's a circular saw, and there would have been a crank that you wound it with, and then you'd release it, and it would spin sort of automatically.
Oh God.
Yeah, and the idea was that it would make it faster. But the reason why I love this saw so much is that it was a massive failure. And I don't think we talk about failure enough in science and medicine. All the things that work, there's a lot of things that don't work. And so this guy who invented this saw, when he tried it out, it was spinning so fast that he took off his assistant's fingers.
Oh, Jesus
so it was
Christ.
A bit of an oops. It never got out of prototype phase, so I had to recreate it for my YouTube channel.
Now, in those old days when they didn't have antibiotics and antiseptic and
right, yeah.
When they saw someone's leg off or something like that, how many times do those people live?
Well, you could pull through the operation. That was one part of it. But then, of course, you could die of postoperative infection.
Yeah.
So my book, The Butchering Art, really focuses on this one guy named Joseph Lister who applies germ theory and develops antisepsis, so germ-fighting techniques.
Right.
And most people don't know who he is, but they know the product Listerine. Mm-hmm. So Listerine was named after him. But I always tell people that, so basically Lister was a British surgeon, and he came to America in 1876 to convince the medical community of germs. And there was a guy in the audience, and he decided to create this product, Listerine. But it wasn't even a mouthwash in the 19th century. It was used to treat gonorrhea.
Whoa.
But also I don't endorse that. Don't throw a little Listerine on it.
Go to a doctor, man.
Yeah, I could just see all the comments already on the YouTube. She told me to throw Listerine on it. No, I don't endorse that, and I'm sure the Listerine company is not too pleased I'm talking about that either.
So Listerine now just is for breath, right?
Yeah.
That's all it does.
Yeah, it's an antiseptic mouthwash. And
is it even any good for you? Is it good to kill all that stuff inside your mouth?
I'm not a real doctor.
Right, but you're a medical historian.
I'm a medical historian. I would say that Dennis would say that Listerine's still a good product.
Do you use it, Jamie?
Kills a lot of bacteria. Yeah.
All right.
Form of it, something like that. I just use something. I don't know if it's Crest
some
or
mouthwash.
Something.
Yeah. You got to switch to Listerine now in
now
honor of Joseph Lister.
So how did he know? How did he know that there was germs, that they were real?
So let me take you back to sort of before he walks on the scene. So these operating theaters, they were filled to the rafters with ticketed spectators. People actually bought tickets to see someone get their leg hacked off.
Oh God!
I know.
How much did it cost?
You know what? No one's asked me that. I don't know how much a ticket would cost for that spectacle. Now I really need to look into that. But
God,
people would
pay to watch that.
They pay, but look what they pay to watch now, right? We could say, and when I sent you my book, I signed it and I said I thought that being strapped to the Victorian operating theater was the original fear factor because I can't imagine anything worse than being strapped to this table.
Yeah.
And so we're talking about before anesthesia, so you're fully awake. Mm-hmm. And one of my favorite surgeons is this guy named Robert Liston. He's 6'2". He's really tall for the 19th century. And he could hold you down with his left arm and he could take your leg off in about 30 seconds.
Oh, Jesus.
Which is what you'd want. That's what you'd want.
You would, but that's still a long time.
It is, yeah. I mean, if we just sat here for 30 seconds with dead air time and you could think about, hacking through that leg.
Or just scream for 30 seconds.
I wonder how many people would be at the end of this podcast. Like 5 people would be still out there listening. So he was incredibly fast. He was known as the fastest knife in the West End. He would walk in. He was a showman. So he'd walk in and he'd say, "Time me, gentlemen." And you could just hear the ripple of pocket watches as they came out.
There's a
there
drawing
he
of him.
is. Yep, there he is.
And he's using a knife in that photo.
Yeah, so actually the Liston knife that he invented was this long-bladed knife, which they think Jack the Ripper may have also used, which is why those rumors are that Jack the Ripper may have been a medical practitioner. But
that was a really common thought, right?
Yeah, I mean, we're never going to know who he is.
Right.
It's unknowable. We're still kind of obsessed with this.
I've heard so many different versions of that.
Yeah, and recently there was some kind of bogus DNA test of a shawl that they said belonged to one of the victims, but it's impossible to prove the provenance of the object.
Right.
But that was Liston, so he's 6'2", he's really tall. One of my favorite stories is he would go so fast that as he was switching instruments, he'd hold these bloody instruments in his mouth just to illustrate how different this was.
Jesus.
That's the face I wanted. I wanted to just totally disgusted through this whole segment. And as he was switching instruments, he accidentally cut off his assistant's finger. And then as he was switching instrument, he slashed the coat of a spectator. And the assistant died of gangrene, the patient died of gangrene, and the spectator died of fright. So it's jokingly
died of fright.
He
Just
died
a little
of
bit
fright.
of blood.
Well, he got slashed with the jacket, and I guess he had a heart attack from the stress. And so it's jokingly referred to as the only operation with a 300% mortality rate. He did a good job that day. He killed three people in one.
When you say slashed, you mean he cut the spectator or just got blood on them?
No, he just cut their coat. As he was kind of switching instruments.
That's all it took to kill someone? I thought people were tougher back then.
Well, not that guy. Now he lives forever in the butchering art as that guy who died of fright.
He had a heart attack?
He must have had a heart attack. It said he died of fright.
Maybe that wasn't real.
Maybe
it
it wasn't.
Seems like horseshit. Doesn't it a little bit? Like
Are
the
you
guy
calling
dying?
me
No,
out?
not you. No, no. The historical
No, of course,
record.
these stories, they get blown out of
Hyperbole
proportion. Yeah.
It just seems like you cut someone's jacket, they're not going to die.
Well, it's a stressful situation. People are getting their limbs hacked off. Your blood pressure would be really high.
Maybe. I get it.
And these theaters were, the floor of the operating theater was crowded as well. So they'd have to actually clear the floor sometimes. So you can imagine, you're strapped to this. And the leg wasn't the worst thing. So one of the tweets that you shared of mine, which your platform seemed to enjoy quite a lot, and sold me a lot of books, by the way, thank you,
awesome.
was this story about this guy who was suffering from a bladder stone, and it got stuck in his urethra. And so out of desperation, he stuck a nail down his penis, and he hammered it to break it up.
Yeah, I remember that one.
Yeah, and people went nuts on your platform for that story. So they obviously are ready for this interview.
How did that work again? That didn't work, right?
It did not work. No, he died.
Yeah, whoops.
That guy definitely died. But it really illustrates how desperate people were back then and how few options they had.
Yeah, there's the image of it. I don't think you're allowed to show this on YouTube, Jamie. You get banned.
That was the one I
sent. Definitely a medical.
I'm sure it is
a medical
but
image.
I don't think you could show that on YouTube.
Really?
That's clearly a penis.
There's penises and breasts on YouTube.
I sent Jamie a lot of penis photos.
I think they look at us more carefully.
All right. Well, it's not on there. I'm just.
Okay, good. Tell folks if
I'll
they
tweet
want to
it
see
later
it.
for people who want
There
to
you
see
go.
that.
If people want to see it, well, Twitter is the most open of all platforms. They let you get away with almost everything. You can have porn on Twitter.
Yeah. Well, I don't have any problems with Instagram. I put that stuff up, but maybe again,
some things get removed from Instagram. It's really kind of interesting. It seems to be dependent upon how many people complain.
Yeah, probably. There's always those people out there looking to be at.
I just think they just want to do something. They just want to press that button.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm mad.
There we go.
Yeah.
I know. I get, at this point, there's so many objects that can cause offense, of course, with medical history. And it's there's a lot of dark history, body snatchers and things like that. And I'm a firm believer that we should tell these stories openly because they happened and medicine and science grew as a result of it. But they're not easy subjects to discuss with an audience, especially when you have so many characters on Twitter and you're trying to get out a complex idea. But
right, and also like you're not just. There's a lot of Twitter pages that I follow where people are just trying to gross people out. But
yes.
You're actually educating people about the history, and we also should be really thankful that these people went through all this stuff so that we don't have to.
Yeah, absolutely. I always say to my audience, so I've been going around the world sort of demolishing romantic notions about people what might think about what it's like to live in the past, because it was pretty bad. And I have visuals as well, and I've had 4 men faint so far. It's always been men. It's just a commentary right now. It's always been men.
Ancestors of that bitch that got his jacket cut and died.
It was that guy. Yeah, those weaklings coming to my lecture. And I think what it is, though, is people think I'm going to see something gross, so I'm not going to eat. And then their blood sugar plummets. So it's not really the grossness, but they're not really prepared, And
that's interesting.
Yeah, and they're standing sometimes. I give lectures at this incredible museum called the Old Operating Theatre in London. It's the second oldest in the world. And so you have to stand because it's like a Victorian operating theatre. And so people lock their knees or whatever.
Oh, wow. So you give actual lectures in the real theaters where they used to cut people?
Yeah. I did my book launch there. And if people want to see it, I filmed sort of a theatrical scene of a young Lister attending an operation in that theater, and it's on my YouTube channel called Under the Knife. And I really want to get this made into a movie. I'm trying to come into Hollywood and convince Hollywood that this Quaker surgeon from the Victorian period deserves the cinema feature. But it is an epic story. He saved more lives than any other person to ever live.
Look, it is an epic story. And for anybody who's ever gone through operations, and I've gone through several of them, we owe those people a massive debt.
Yeah. You don't have to be awake, strapped to the table.
I had both my knees reconstructed, and you wake up and they're fixed.
Yeah,
Yay.
it's amazing. Yeah. And in the past, before anesthesia, a lot of times patients were sat in chairs, so they weren't laid down. And they were sat in these very high chairs so that their feet dangled, so they couldn't brace against the knife. If you think about like pushing off with your feet,
of course.
There's a story about a guy named Robert Penman, and I know we have images, and I'm sure YouTube won't take those down. He comes to Robert Liston, the fastest knife in the West End, in 1828, and he has this huge facial tumor growing. I mean, it's been growing for about 8 years. It's taking up his whole face. He can't breathe now. And Liston looks at him and says, I can't do this operation, which is tantamount to a death sentence. But he goes up to Scotland and he goes, there he is.
Wow.
Yeah, it's incredible when you see that painting. So Penman goes up to Scotland and he sees a guy named James Syme. And Syme agrees to do this operation. And Penman is sat for 24 minutes in a chair, restrained, while this thing is cut out of his face
Jesus
and dropped
Christ.
in a bucket. And
Did he survive?
Yeah, well, we have a picture of him later in life.
Oh, wow.
And he
looks like he's going,
Yeah, he looks kind of like an ugly Abraham Lincoln, and Lincoln wasn't really known for his looks.
I bet he's psyched that he doesn't have that thing on his face, though.
Yeah, I mean you could see that the jaw is definitely slimmer.
Yeah.
But he doesn't look too deformed considering what he went through. So it is incredible. You get such crazy stories. Like there's a woman who has a mastectomy in 1840 without any anesthetic. Now at this time, you would have, if you were wealthy or if you were middle class, you'd have this operation in your home. So you just have it on like your kitchen table.
Oh, Jesus.
Which would have been safer than going into the hospitals.
Really?
Yeah, because the hospitals were crawling with all kinds of infection. So hospitals were places for the poor. And to give you an idea of how gross it was, the bug catcher who would rid the beds of lice, he was paid more than the doctors and surgeons in this time. Yeah, because I mean, that's pretty important, right? There's maggots, all kinds of things crawling around in these hospitals. So if you were wealthy or middle class, you had your surgeon come to your home. And so she has a surgeon come, and the surgeon determines that, yes, the breast has to come off, and says, I'm going to return, but I'm not going to tell you the day, which would make me more anxious. He thought it was going to help her not focus on it, but all you would be thinking about, right, is when is this guy going to show up?
That's a person without breasts.
Yeah, exactly. He was like, I'll just show up. It'll be easy. And so he shows up, and he goes into her bedroom, and he opens his hand and shows her the knife he's going to use. And he says to prepare her soul for death. Like, this isn't very confidence-inspiring. Any doctors listening, don't tell your patients to prepare their soul for death. And she does survive, and she talks about how it's so vascular that the blood blinds him at one point. And so, like, just when you think it can't get worse, he can't see. And he's under... she is under his hand for an hour and a half when he cuts away. And she survives. She ends up living a long and somewhat happy life. I'm sure she had a lot of nightmares. Yeah, there we see.
So do they tie this woman down? Like, how do they handle this?
They would have definitely had to restrain her. I mean,
so
people were probably a little bit stronger or more able to adapt to pain than we are, but nonetheless, there would have been some pretty heavy restraining.
What year was this?
That was in the 1840s.
Do we know when cancer became common, or was it always common in humans?
That's a good question. The oldest archaeological record, I believe, is 2,000 years old of metastatic cancer. So it's older than you think. They're diagnosing it for centuries and centuries. I'm not really an expert in history of cancer, but it is around. And so with breast cancer, probably by the time it got to the stage of mastectomy, it probably would have spread. If you think about it being visible to the naked eye.
But yet she survived.
She did survive, and so then you'd have to question whether she had breast cancer or maybe it was some kind of
cyst?
maybe a cyst, and she went through that for that.
Oh.
But yeah, and again, before antiseptics, before Lister comes on and comes up with germ fighting techniques, this would have been so dangerous because you have this open cavity and wound.
Yeah.
And so Joseph Lister, when he comes up with his antiseptic techniques, he actually performs a mastectomy on his sister on his dining room table.
Oh, Christ.
And she survives, and that's in the book. See, this would be a great movie, don't you think?
Yeah, I do think it would be a great movie. It's like, it would be a great movie for the Coen brothers.
Yeah.
Because it's so chaos-filled.
I know, and all of that kind of grittiness. And,
they do good period pieces, too.
Yeah.
Plus, they could make it more entertaining.
Let's make this happen, Joe.
I have no pull. I'm not a part of that world. But this guy with the face, where they cut that tumor out of his face. So for 24 minutes, that's all it took to cut that thing out of his face?
In that case, yeah. And remember, of course, it depended on the skill of your surgeon. Mm-hmm. So he goes to a very good surgeon named James Syme. But there's a story. So going back to penises, there's lithotomy is the removal of the stone, which you saw kind of a demonstration there. And it was incredibly painful. So they stuck a rod down the penis and they cut through the scrotum and they removed the stone. And of course, there was no pain medication and it was just awful.
Did they drink?
It's kind of a myth because, of course, drinking would thin your blood. But someone asked me, they said, I heard that surgeons would punch the patient out. And I was like, wow, you'd have to be really good to knock someone out on a first punch. And of course, you do more damage. You could do a lot of damage to the head. That's definitely didn't happen. Unless someone can prove me wrong. Maybe there's like a weird example. But I've never come across that. So it was you and the surgeon. And with the lithotomy, it takes a good surgeon, it took about 5 minutes. Well, there's a guy named Stephen Pollard in 1828 who goes in to have this done. Now, it's incredibly embarrassing. You're naked from the waist down. It's an embarrassing operation. It's painful. He's brought into the theater, and the surgeon ends up taking over an hour because he's so inept. And the patient is screaming, please just stop. And the surgeon yells back at him for having abnormal anatomy, which, how would you like that? You're sitting there on the table and you're being blamed for this going wrong. And he pulls through the operation, but he does die of postoperative infection.
Abnormal anatomy, how so?
He just said, you have abnormal anatomy. And so on the autopsy report, it was revealed that there was nothing abnormal about his anatomy. The surgeon just was really inept.
Oh, God.
Yeah, it wasn't good.
So he's blaming the guy.
Did you have lunch before this?
Yeah, I did, but I'm all right.
Good. That's good because then you won't faint. Right?
Well, I hosted Fear Factor for 6 years.
That's true, yes.
I've seen everything.
Yeah.
Almost nothing makes me sick.
What's the worst? I mean, was there ever a segment on Fear Factor that you thought, ooh, I don't know if I can watch that?
No. When they had a drink come, that was rough.
Oh.
Yeah. That was what got the show canceled.
Yeah.
But that was the second version of Fear Factor when it came back for a brief period of time, and they were going way too hard. They were trying to outdo themselves.
Further, yeah.
Yeah, they were like, Fear Factor's back, and it's crazier than ever, and they just went way over the top.
That's what they do with TV, right? Like, just always pushing the boundaries.
They didn't have to.
No.
They could have just gone with regular Fear Factor, and we would have all been fine.
We could do historical Fear Factor. We could recreate these sort of horrible things that people
It was a
went
blessing
through.
in disguise. But